If a week is a long time in politics, in a pandemic, it is an eternity.
Mr. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Just 6 days ago, Rishi Sunak unveiled a £12 billion coronavirus firewall in his budget. Now, with a dramatic spreading of the virus, the Chancellor unveiled a £350 billion firewall.
This national effort will be underpinned by government interventions in the economy on a scale unimaginable only a few weeks ago. This is not a time for ideology and orthodoxy. This is a time to be bold.
In the hope of preventing the economy from seizing up entirely, the Chancellor announced £330 billion in loan guarantees to businesses, equivalent to 15% of GDP. Increasing from 1.2 million to 5 million, the amount small and medium-sized businesses can borrow through a special scheme. Scrapping business rates for all retail and hospitality businesses for 1 year. That is part of £20 billion in business rate support and grant funding that will see grants to small businesses increase from £3,000 to £10,000. Separately, mortgage lenders have offered payment holidays of up to 3 months to those struggling with their finances as a result of the virus. An upping of the rhetoric to signal the scale of the crisis.
We must act like any wartime government and do whatever it takes to support our economy.
A step change in the government's attempts to shore up the economy, a day after a dramatic acceleration in the government's response to the virus. Westminster is mostly working together in this crisis, though Labour does have concerns about whether the Chancellor's economic package is sufficiently well targeted at the less well-off and the vulnerable.
Nobody wants to be critical of the government at this time. We really want to work with them to make sure we do the right thing for the country. But in my own constituency, in my own family, for example, my son is self-employed, my daughter-in-law has a severe kidney problem, she's on home dialysis, they are self-isolating. My son is really worried how they're going to be able to pay the rent. There was nothing there today to tell us how he's going to pay his rent. There's nothing there to say how he's going to be able to access money to keep them going as a family.
The Chancellor has definitely unveiled his big bazooka. This is an unprecedented measure in peacetime. I am hoping that it is enough to do three main things. The first is to give that confidence to the country that we have an economic team and a government and a parliament that is willing to do whatever it takes, and I think he's definitely passed that test. The second is practical measures to help liquidity for businesses over the next 3 months, which is obviously going to be very, very difficult, and I hope that we've passed that test. The third thing is what a lot of people will start to think about, is for individuals, particularly the self-employed. Individually, how will this look over the next 3 months? And that's the bit that I'm looking for over the coming days, more detail to come out on.
Another day of action in this self-declared war amid a darkening mood at Westminster.
Nick Watt there, and before we move on to our guests, Nick, what have you been hearing this evening?
Well, you heard in my report there that there's some Labour unease that this package of measures does not go far enough, and I spoke to one member of the Shadow Cabinet that said that the government has got to go a lot further on helping the less well-off and the vulnerable if they want Labour support for the emergency legislation on coronavirus. Obviously, the government can get legislation through, it has the votes, but if it wants to go through quickly, then it would be very helpful if Labour supports them. On another matter, there is a strong expectation amongst ministers that schools are going to be closing rather sooner than people expected. One cabinet minister told me that we'd be lucky if schools make it to the Easter holiday, and there's a feeling in government that if that happens, that will raise questions about whether GCSEs and A-levels can go ahead this summer. It is important to say that no decisions have been made yet about closing schools and delaying exams.
Big decision that, Nick. Thanks very much indeed. Well, we're joined now by Labour's Shadow Economic Secretary Jonathan Reynolds and Dame Caroline Fairbairn, the Director General of the CBI. Can you just confirm for that what Nick was hearing, presumably from one of your colleagues, Jonathan? Would you not support this as government legislation, the bailout, unless it went a lot further?
Well, it was welcome that the Chancellor made the statement, and it was welcome in terms of what was announced. But is it enough at this stage? To be frank, no, it's not. There has to be much more support for workers who don't qualify for statutory sick pay. There has to be a conversation about the level of support and whether that is raised. And of course, whilst we've seen things around mortgage holidays, mortgage repayment holidays, we haven't seen yet things for renters. Now, we've been promised all of those things, but the fact is tonight, people up and down this country are going to bed and they're terrified. They're genuinely terrified as to what this will mean for them. So the government has to move more quickly. We want to support measures, this national effort to beat the coronavirus and what it means now for the economy as well as for public health. But we've got to see the government come forward quite quickly on that.
So just to clarify, you're saying you won't, as things stand, support it as legislation? I mean, we know the government's got a majority, but...
We'll have to see that. Now, we want to be supported, but let's be clear. The package as it stands is not sufficient. Let's see what the government say. There was an indication in that statement that they do want to go further and further announcements will be made. So let's see where we are before we get to that point. We haven't yet seen, of course, the legislation itself.
Caroline Fairbairn, was this a whatever it takes moment for you? I mean, we're talking 330 billion. The figures sound very high, but as Jonathan's explained, it's for businesses, for employers, rather than employees.
It's an incredibly important and big step the Chancellor has taken today. Whether it's enough, there may need to be more, and there almost certainly will need to be more. But for now, this is a £330 billion lifeline of loans. That is 15% of GDP. That will really help. The key thing now is to get that out of the door of our banks. We know banks this evening are contacting their clients and their customers to get the money out of the door.
Do you think your members, smaller businesses, will actually take up these loans? Or will they say, at this point in the day, I'm about to fold, I can't go through this whole thing, I've already maybe laid off my staff in the last 10 days. I mean, will they actually put themselves in a position of taking that risk?
It's extraordinarily urgent, and I think some will. Others will need more help, and that's why I think we're talking about going further. So in terms of the help for the retail and hospitality sector today, that is enormously helpful because that is cash and that should get into their hands very quickly. So
you would be saying don't lay off your staff now?
The key thing, every business I talk to, they are trying to keep their people. And where I would agree with Jonathan is I think there is more work that needs to be done on helping businesses to keep their people, and that does need a mechanism to top up wages to enable business to keep them on.
What is that mechanism? What do you actually want to see as a direct improvement on this?
Well, the Chancellor said he would prefer to use existing mechanisms rather than invent new ones, although we've got to be honest, this looks like something that is not necessarily a short-term set of measures. This could be going on for some time. Now, as Caroline said, businesses need the support in terms of liquidity, but they're also going to need people coming in and being able to spend money in there, and that's going to require an increase in statutory sick pay. Lots of countries are now, in fact, covering the income protection of workers, basically saying if companies keep their staff on, the government will take the steps to protect that income. That may be something that we need to look at, but it's in the interest of workers and in the interest of businesses.
I wonder whether you think that this is where universal income begins. This has been talked of theoretically now for some years, not least by your Shadow Chancellor. Do you think this is the point at which we recognise that people will have to be paid whatever, whether it's coronavirus, whether it's automation, whether it's a future that doesn't include as many employed people?
I think there may be a moment for that, Emily, but I think we need to recognise right now we want businesses to be able to stay open and stay employing people. And that's why the loans matter, that's why the direct support for retail and hospitality matters. We actually think that there's scope for going further, for example, to have tax deferrals so that on VAT and corporation tax, so that more businesses can stay open.
Because the best way to see this as a handout, essentially, rather than a loan?
Well, the thing is, this is different from the financial crash because actually we have many viable businesses and a vibrant economy. And so I think loans will work, but we are going to need, I think, to go further over the next few days. The Chancellor has said that. I think this is something he has absolutely paved the way for. But the priority needs to be keeping businesses open and keeping people in work.
Is there a way that consumers can help to keep businesses open if they're not able to, go to the pub, go to the restaurants, go to the theatres?
The advice has to be clear. I mean, the real problem last night was the government giving advice saying avoid theatres, avoid restaurants, avoid pubs. before they'd made an announcement in terms of what the support would be for those businesses. I mean, that kind of confused communication, to be frank, has to end, and it just has to get better. People do want to support their local businesses. I think people are worried, though, as to what the advice will be and what they can do. So the crucial thing right now is for clear communication from the government as to what approach to take.
Thank you both very much indeed. Thank you.